The cold marble was the first thing she would remember. Not Holden's fingers clamped around her wrist like a trap spring, not the obscene cheerfulness of the string quartet, playing something bright and oblivious 40 feet away on the other side of the velvet curtain. Not even the sound of her own heartbeat hammering so loud, she was certain the rest of the Gala could hear it. Just the cold of the pillar at her back, pressing through midnight sapphire silk, reminding her that the real world existed beneath all this glitter, whether she wanted it to or not. Then something in the air shifted. Not the room, something atmospheric, the pressure drop that comes before a storm that hasn't announced itself. Lila felt it before she understood it, and so did Holden, because his grip loosened by exactly half a degree and his eyes cut sideways toward the gap in the velvet curtains. The man standing there was not large in the way that announced itself. He wasn't filling the doorway or blocking the light. He simply stood, completely still and entirely unhurried, in a charcoal three-piece suit that fit him the way expensive things fit men who have never once bought anything off a rack. His dark hair was cut short at the sides, slightly longer on top, as though he had run one hand through it and then stopped caring. He had a jaw built for holding hard expressions. And he was, with agonizing patience, reaching for the cufflink on his right sleeve. His fingers found the gold clasp. He unlatched it, slipped it into his breast pocket. Then he started on the left. "Take your hand off her," he said. Not loud, completely conversational, the voice of a man who had never in his life needed to repeat himself. 2 hours earlier, Lila Stanton had been the happiest she'd felt in 3 years. She was 31 years old, the newly appointed creative director of Wren & Sable Studio, and she was standing in the Vanderbilt room of the Knickerbocker Hotel, holding a glass of Pol Roger and a Meridian Innovation Award in the same hand, which was objectively a logistical challenge, and she did not care even slightly. The sapphire gown had been a deliberate choice. Blue because every woman Lila had ever known kept telling her to wear dark colors to look slimmer, and she had spent the better part of a decade listening to that particular piece of unsolicited guidance, and tonight she was finished. The gown was cut to celebrate what it covered. The full curve of her hips, the generous sweep of her chest, the soft weight of her arms. She was a plus-size woman in a room that worshipped sharp angles. And she had commissioned the dress from a designer who understood that beauty was not a problem requiring a solution. She had spent 8 months rebuilding herself after Holden, not just her confidence, her entire sense of what she was allowed to want. The first month she had barely gotten off her couch. The second, she had started designing again, just for herself, small pattern sketches and color studies that didn't need to impress anyone. By the 6th month, she had pitched the inclusive design campaign that earned Wren & Sable the Meridian nomination. Tonight, she had won. Her colleague Brooke found her near the ice display, cheeks bright, shoes already making her feet regret every decision of the last 3 hours. "Talia Greenvale wants to talk about a full rebrand," Brooke said, pressing close so no one could overhear. Talia Greenvale founded one of the 3 largest luxury retail groups in the country. She said the campaign was the first time she had seen her actual customers reflected in the work. Lila closed her eyes briefly. This was the thing. This was the moment she had been building toward. She felt the weight of the award in her hand and let herself have 3 full seconds of uncomplicated joy. Then she smelled it. Cedar and leather and something underneath, something specific to him, the olfactory equivalent of a trapdoor opening in solid ground. Her body understood before her brain caught up. Her lungs seized. Her fingers went cold around the champagne stem. There she is. The voice was measured, pleasant, entirely without warmth. The voice of a man who had learned to speak the way predators learn to stay still, not because he was calm, but because the stillness made him more dangerous. Lila turned. Holden Pratt stood 6 feet away in a midnight tuxedo, and the particular expression he reserved for moments when he had found her doing something He hadn't given her permission to be proud of. He was 44, silver at the temples, handsome in the way that required maintenance and money, and a complete absence of interiority. He had been the venture capital partner who backed the firm that hired Lila 4 years ago. He had told her on their first date that he had seen something in her that other people missed. She had believed him for 2 years before she understood what he had actually seen. A woman whose talent he could quietly claim and whose insecurities he could use as a leash. "Award night," Holden said, sliding closer, keeping his voice perfectly modulated so that anyone watching would see 2 old acquaintances catching up. "They're giving out awards now to anyone who can draw a round girl in a sundress. Standards have really dropped." Her throat closed. The award felt suddenly heavy and slightly absurd. "Holden," her voice was steadier than she felt, "I'm not doing this tonight." "You're not doing this." He repeated it with a small, patient smile. "You have gotten delusional since you left, haven't you?" He stepped closer and she stepped back before she could stop herself, and hated herself immediately for it. "You think one award makes you legitimate. You think these people respect you. Lila, they're being polite. There's a difference. You were always too soft to understand that distinction." She moved to go around him. He moved faster. His hand caught her upper arm. Not grabbing, not yet, just firm enough that she understood she was not going anywhere he didn't allow. He angled her toward the corridor behind the dessert stations, where the velvet curtains created a private shadow between the event space and the service hallway, and she went because her body remembered that resistance made it worse. "You embarrassed me." The pleasant surface of his voice had dissolved into something she recognized. The specific cold of his anger, the kind that never raised itself to shouting, because shouting would have implied she mattered enough to shout at. "I have business contacts in this building tonight. People I work with. People who are watching you accept an award as though you built something, when everything you know, every connection you have, every technique you're applying in that campaign, I shaped that. I made you, and you walked away like I was nothing. Let go of me." Her voice had dropped to barely a whisper. Not a choice. Her throat had narrowed to a channel, and that was all it could produce. "We're going to step outside," he said. "You're going to compose yourself and come with me to my car, and we're going to have a conversation about how you intend to correct the narrative you've been putting out there about why we ended." His thumb found the nerve above her elbow and pressed. "Or I'm going to make one phone call and have every grant and contract you've touched in the last 8 months frozen, pending a financial review. You understand me?" The string quartet finished something bright and hopeful. A wave of polite applause from the main room. "Take your hand off her." Holden's jaw tightened. His eyes moved to the gap in the velvet curtains where the man in the charcoal suit stood, now working his left cufflink, loose with the patience of someone who had absolutely no reason to hurry. "Who are you?" Holden said, not a question, a territorial statement. The man unlatched the left cufflink, tucked it into his pocket. Then, with the same measured deliberation, he reached up and began rolling back his right sleeve. Once, twice, revealing a forearm covered in dark, intricate ink, dense geometric patterns running from his wrist to the inside of his elbow, interrupted by 2 pale scars that had healed badly, the kind that didn't come from surgery. He started on the left. "Dante Caruso." He said it the way people say things that don't require emphasis because the words themselves carry sufficient weight. "And you are standing in a building where I hold a majority stake in the operating company, which makes everyone on the other side of these curtains, including the security team you're currently hoping will appear. Technically, my staff." He finished rolling the second sleeve. He looked at Holden with the unhurried attention of a man solving a minor but distasteful administrative problem. "So when I say take your hand off her, I mean now with some understanding of what the alternative looks like." Holden's grip on Lila's arm didn't loosen. "She's a former employee. We have unfinished business." "You're confusing the words employee and person," Dante said, moving into the alcove. He didn't rush. He had the specific gait of a man who had never once arrived somewhere late because he had nowhere to be that wouldn't wait. His eyes found Lila's for a single moment, dark, direct, asking something wordless, and she managed a fractional shake of her head. That was apparently sufficient. He looked back at Holden. "I'll explain something once as a professional courtesy," he said, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "I watched you manage this conversation for 9 minutes. I saw you find her. I watched you walk her behind these curtains. I know what that walk looks like." Something changed in his expression, not anger. Something colder and more absolute. "I know what you are, and I have very limited patience for what you are." "You have no idea who you're talking to," Holden said. His voice had a new fraying at its edges. "Holden Frederick Pratt," Dante said. "Managing partner of Pratt Alderman Capital. 2 pending arbitration complaints, 1 settled assault claim from 2019 under NDA, currently under informal SEC review for valuation irregularities in 3 portfolio companies." He tilted his head slightly. "Should I continue, or would you like to release her arm and step back?" The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Holden released her. Dante crossed the remaining distance immediately and positioned himself between Lila and Holden with the efficient calm of a man rearranging furniture, then looked down at her wrist, where the marks of Holden's grip were already darkening from pink to purple. "Are you hurt?" Quiet, only for her. "I'm fine," she said. It was not remotely true. "We'll address that." He turned back to Holden, who was straightening his jacket with the mechanical movements of a man running on autopilot while his actual processing struggled to catch up. "You're going to leave this event tonight, and you're going to let your attorneys know that if you contact her, approach her, or leverage any institutional relationship against her interests, the SEC review I mentioned becomes a personal interest of mine." A brief smile, without warmth. "I have very good relationships with the people who run those reviews." Holden's gaze moved to Lila one more time. His expression cycled through something that, in a different man, might have been fear before settling back into the familiar shape of contempt. "This isn't over," he said. "You know that?" "Sir," a large man in a suit appeared at the curtain gap. "I'll need to escort you to the exit." Holden adjusted his collar, memorized Dante's face, left. Lila exhaled. Her legs were less steady than she needed them to be. The back seat of the Bentley was quieter than the inside of her own apartment. The city moved past the tinted windows in blurred streaks of gold and white, and Lila sat with her hands folded in her lap and tried to find her equilibrium somewhere in the space between the leather seats. Dante sat across from her. He hadn't crowded her into the car. He had asked, standing on the November sidewalk with his sleeves still rolled to his forearms. "My car is a block away. You don't have to say yes." She had looked at the hotel entrance, had thought about Holden still somewhere inside that building, and had said yes. He poured water from a bottle and handed it to her without comment. He didn't speak until she had taken 3 sips. "You knew who I was," Lila said, "before tonight?" "Yes." "How long?" He was quiet for a moment. "I attended the Meridian Foundation benefit in September. You presented on the Inclusive Design Initiative. You said the fashion industry had spent 40 years designing for the customer it wished it had, instead of for the customer it actually served." A pause. It was the most honest thing I had heard in a room full of people paid to perform honesty. "I had someone find out who you were that evening." Lila looked at him. "You've been watching my career for 2 months." "Watching," he confirmed, "not following. There's a distinction." "What is it?" "Following is surveillance," he said. "Watching is waiting for the right moment to stop being a stranger." She didn't know what to do with that, so she looked out the window at the west side going by. The Bentley slipped into a private garage beneath a residential tower in the West Village. The kind of building that didn't put its name on the door. He guided her to a private elevator without touching her, which she noticed, and which she was grateful for. The penthouse it opened into was long and spare, dark wood and low light, with a wall of glass that made the entire lower Manhattan skyline available, like a painting someone had commissioned and then decided was too understated to hang anywhere with witnesses. He brought her to a charcoal sofa and returned a minute later with a leather first aid kit. Then, without theater, he sat on the low table in front of her, not beside her, not looming over her, and examined her wrist. The bruising had spread, a ring of purple tracking exactly where Holden's fingers had been. Dante looked at it for a long moment. His jaw held something tight that didn't surface in his expression. He opened the kit, found arnica gel, and applied it with his thumbs in slow, careful circles. His hands were warm. The scars she'd seen on his forearms continued across the backs of his hands in older, smaller patterns that had had time to fade to silver. "Why are you doing this?" Lila asked. He looked up. "I'm a creative director at a mid-sized studio," she said. "You're whoever you are. I heard your name and watched his face change, and I understand enough about this city to know what that means. You could have walked past that curtain." Dante set the gel down. He looked at her the way she imagined. People looked at things they found genuinely worth understanding. Not with admiration exactly, but with the specific attention of someone who recognized structural integrity when they encountered it. "Men like him work the same way in every industry," he said. "They find something exceptional and position themselves at its center, and they make the exceptional thing believe it cannot exist without them." He held her gaze. "You walked into that room tonight, and you were the only person in it who looked like they actually belonged there. Not performing it, not working at it, just entirely present, taking up exactly the space you're entitled to." He paused. "That doesn't require an explanation from me. You've known what you are longer than you've believed it." Lila's eyes burned. She pressed her lips together. She was still trying to locate a response to that when the elevator opened. The man who stepped out was compact, silver-templed, holding a tablet with the ease of someone who considered it a permanent extension of his body. "Sandro," Dante said. "Sorry to interrupt." Sandro looked at Lila with measured sympathy. "We have a problem." Dante's expression didn't shift. "Tell me." Pratt went directly from the hotel to his attorneys. Sandro set the tablet on the table, angling it toward both of them. "His legal team filed an emergency injunction with the New York Supreme Court 40 minutes ago. He's alleging that during Ms. Stanton's time working in proximity to Pratt Alderman's portfolio companies, she had unauthorized access to proprietary design assets and may have incorporated them into her current work." Sandro paused. "The injunction, if it holds, freezes all of Wren and active contracts pending review, including the Meridian campaign. He has a press conference scheduled for 9 tomorrow morning at the Pratt Alderman offices. He's framing it as a whistleblower action. His publicist already has the statement drafted. A man who cared about her, gave her opportunities, now heartbroken to discover she exploited that trust." Lila set both hands flat on her knees and stared at the screen. Holden had promised her this. 3 months before she finally left him, during a fight that ended with her sitting on the bathroom floor listening to things breaking in the apartment on the other side of the door, he had told her, "If you leave, I will make certain that everything you touch from here on turns to dust. I will be in the background of every room you walk into for the rest of your career." She had believed him. She had stayed 2 more months because she believed him. "Lila," Dante's voice was quiet, grounding. She looked up. "Is there anything you know about his business practices that he wouldn't want examined?" And there it was, the thing she had been sitting with for 3 years, not understanding until this moment that it was a weapon and that it had always been hers. "Yes," she said. She straightened. "In 2021, Pratt Alderman acquired Wren and Sable. I wasn't at the firm yet, this was before my time, but during the acquisition period, Holden had a valuation report commissioned. He left his laptop open during a call once, and I saw the document name. I read the first 2 pages before I closed it. She looked at Sandro, then at Dante. There were 2 separate valuations. One presented to the sellers, one circulated internally to his limited partners. The numbers were different by $4 million. Sandro went very still. There's more. Her voice was gaining something, a forward momentum, the particular clarity that comes when fear gets replaced by its harder sister. Holden had a freelance designer, an older woman who had been doing creative work for 3 of his portfolio companies simultaneously. She was the actual creative intelligence behind 2 of the brands he sold for a combined $57 million. Her name doesn't appear anywhere in the deal documentation. She signed an NDA with a clause preventing her from claiming professional credit. Lila looked at Dante directly. He tried to make me sign something similar. I refused, which was one of the things that started it between us. But I kept her contact information. I've had it in my phone for 2 years because I thought, I don't know exactly what I thought, that I might need a witness someday. Dante looked at Sandro. Something passed between them quickly. How long before his 9 a.m. statement? Dante asked. 7 hours and 40 minutes, Sandro said. Get me the Wren and Sable acquisition files, all of them. Cross-reference the valuation dates against the SEC filings from the portfolio restructure. Dante stood, buttoning the lowest button of his jacket. And get the contact information from Ms. Stanton for the designer, tonight. Sandro was already moving toward the door. Dante turned back to Lila. For a moment, the logistics retreated from his face, and what was behind them was something direct and uncomplicated. He built that injunction expecting you to have nothing, Dante said. Are you ready to show him what nothing looks like? Lila looked at the bruise on her wrist. Looked at the Manhattan skyline spread across the glass behind him. Looked at the Meridian Award sitting on the end table where she had set it when she came in, slightly scratched from traveling in her hand through an entire evening. Tell me where to be at 9 a.m., she said. By 8:45 the next morning, the lobby of the Pratt Alderman Tower on Park Avenue had been quietly, efficiently filled with people who were not journalists. 2 were from the SEC's New York regional office. 3 were FBI. 1 was Lila Stanton, in a wine-red blazer over cream silk and heels that clicked across marble with the specific authority of a woman who has made a permanent decision about the kind of room she is allowed to walk into. She went through the door first. She and Dante had agreed on that at 3 in the morning over bad coffee in his kitchen. This was her fight, and she would be the one to enter the room. The conference room on the 22nd floor went quiet in a very particular way when the door opened. Holden sat at the head of the table with his publicist and 2 attorneys and a handful of journalists and a camera from a local business channel. He saw Lila, and something happened in his jaw. This is a private press event, his attorney began. I'm happy to be escorted out, Lila said pleasantly, setting a folder on the conference table. But before that happens, you'll want to look at page 2, which includes the case number for the SEC inquiry opened at 6:15 this morning into the valuation discrepancy in the 2021 Wren and Sable acquisition. She paused. And page 3, which is an affidavit from the designer whose work generated $57 million in sale value under your client's name without her attribution, compensation, or credit. Complete silence. Dante stepped into the doorway behind her. He said nothing. He didn't have to. His presence functioned as its own statement, the kind that Holden's face read in real time, moving through the available options and finding all of them closed. This is fabricated, Holden said. This is a coordinated attack by a woman who... Holden, one of his own attorneys, touched his arm, a warning. The injunction filed last night has been stayed pending review, Lila continued. She could hear the steadiness of her own voice and felt something in her chest unfurl slow and permanent, like a sail finally catching the wind it was made for. The contracts it was designed to freeze are intact. The designer you had sign that NDA has a meeting with the Department of Labor at noon. Holden looked at her with the specific expression she recognized from the worst nights, the reaching, the casting about for something that would make her feel small enough to comply. She watched it move through him, watched it arrive at nothing. One of the FBI agents stepped forward and put a hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Pratt, we need to ask you some questions." Holden looked at Lila one final time. His mouth opened and what came out was stripped of everything except the bare mechanics of what he had always been. "After everything I did for you," he said, "I gave you your career, I gave you." "You gave me 3 years," Lila said. "I gave them back." She picked up her folder. She turned away. Behind her, she heard the sound of a chair scraping back, of formal voices reciting formal language, of the specific collapse that happens when a room full of journalists realizes they are covering a story that is nothing like the one they came to file. She didn't look back. Dante fell into step beside her in the corridor. He didn't take her arm. He walked close enough that his shoulder was within reach, and she thought about that precision, the offer without the presumption, and then she reached out and slid her hand into the crook of his elbow. He looked down at her. Something moved across his face that was entirely unlike the man who had walked into a velvet curtain alcove the previous evening without blinking. "You didn't need me in there," he said. "No," she agreed, "but I didn't not need you either." She let herself lean slightly into his arm, just the fraction of a degree that meant I choose this, not because I couldn't stand alone. "Is there a difference?" "Yes," Dante said. He covered her hand with his carefully, the way he handled things he wasn't sure he had earned yet. "There's a significant difference." They walked out of the building into the thin November light. The city moved around them the way it always did, relentless and indifferent, and entirely unaware that somewhere on the 22nd floor, a man who had spent years making a woman believe she was nothing had just been walked out of the room he had built on her back. Lila tilted her face up to the cold air and breathed. She had walked out of that relationship with nothing but her talent and her nerve, and a phone number she had saved for a situation she had prayed would never come. She had walked back into the room he had designed to humiliate her, and she had taken it apart from the inside. She wasn't the woman he had practiced on anymore. She was the one who left. And this time, she was never going back. What a ride. Lila walked in with a folder and walked out with everything she'd built and everything she was owed. If you're rooting for her and want to see where things go with Dante, smash that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to Sharp Curves for more stories about women who refuse to stay small. Do you think Holden saw it coming? We want to know.